How long is a piece of string? This is a question we often end up asking ourselves when reviewing requirements, especially when trying to answer the question, can we actually demonstrate that we've met this requirement? The reason for this is that too many of our requirements are ambiguous. In other words, they can be interpreted in more than one way, which is why we end up asking ourselves, how long is a piece of string? But before we get stuck into Module 9, time for a quick recap of our trilogy called Shoulda, Coulda, Woulda. This trilogy was all about using defined terms consistently and with military precision. The term shall denotes a requirement, so watch out for accidentally using will and must for your requirements. Should is used for recommendations, which we use sparingly, and track when using them on projects so that we know what we are actually getting for our money. And finally, we use the term may to denote options and acceptable alternatives. These are supposed to make life easier on projects. In Part 3 of the trilogy, we pointed out that requirements authors must guard against hidden requirements. So watch out for phrases such as may only, may not, may, but with strings attached. Back to Module 9. To demonstrate why we must avoid ambiguous requirements on projects, allow me to introduce you to the 15-year-old Kevin. As with many teenagers, 15-year-old Kevin's brain is undergoing what specialists call intensive remodeling, where the prefrontal cortex, the area of the brain involved in decision-making, planning, and self-control, is the last part to mature. Through a series of interactions with 15-year-old Kevin, we'll demonstrate the challenges posed by ambiguous requirements. So, let's get started. Where possible, you shall place your dirty dishes in the dishwasher. This is an example of a requirement with a free pass or an escape clause. Escape clauses strip your requirement of its significance. Words and phrases such as normally, generally, typically, where possible, if required, if necessary, if practical, as appropriate, these are all open to interpretation and misuse, and therefore must be avoided in our requirements. Now let's take a look at the impact of vague terms on requirements. You shall lower the music volume to an acceptable level. Acceptable level, what does that mean? To 15-year-old Kevin, acceptable means 100 decibels. To his father, it means no more than 60 decibels. Here are some more examples of requirements containing vague terms. You shall eat more vegetables. Now, one small piece of cucumber and one very small tomato does indeed meet the requirement, but it's not what was actually intended. You shall operate your bicycle in a safe manner. Our idea of safe and 15-year-old Kevin's idea of safe are worlds apart. Close to exam time, you shall minimize the time spent on the games console. How close is close? What does minimize mean? How long is a piece of string? We cannot list all vague terms, but the more popular ones are shown here. The next group of terms to avoid can be represented by the following scenes. You shall remove clothing from your floor, such as socks. Let's try that again. You shall remove clothing from your floor, including but not limited to socks. One last attempt. You shall remove things from your floor such as socks, undergarments, etc. Open-ended terms such as including but not limited to and etc. are all open to interpretation. The chances of you getting what you think you need are dramatically reduced when using open-ended terms, so are best avoided when writing requirements. Next up is the oblique or the forward slash. On some keyboards, this symbol appears together with the question mark, and that is wholly appropriate. As this symbol has so many different meanings that we should only be using it with units, such as kilometers per hour. In the majority of cultures, the oblique is shorthand for or. You shall complete math or French or geography homework before playing on the game's console. In the same way, avoid using and or. Trust us when we say that most people use or interpret this construct incorrectly. As with much of Requirements 101, we end up asking, what do you really mean? If you mean and, we'll use and, or even two separate requirements. If you mean or, then write their requirement as an exclusive or. So how to avoid or spot ambiguous requirements? First of all, stick to all the other things we've been covering in Requirements 101. Singular statements, one requirement at a time, correct spelling and grammar, trying to use the active voice, avoiding pronouns, and not confusing terms like shall with will and must. Secondly, avoid using escape clauses, vague terms, open-ended phrases, and confusing symbols that we have been covering in this module. Thirdly, ask yourself the critical question, is the requirement stated in such a way that someone can actually prove that they have met the requirement without having to interpret the meaning of the requirement or make any assumptions? Asking yourself this question on the verifiability of the requirement statement has proven the most effective technique for identifying and fixing ambiguous requirements. And the final question to ask yourself, does the requirement pass the delete test? In other words, if you deleted an ambiguous and vague requirement, would it actually have any impact on the design or the project outcomes? We sometimes write motherhood statements that sound nice, that give us a lovely warm feeling that this story will have a happy ending, but in actual fact, as design requirements go, you are better off deleting them. Here is my credit card. You shall purchase affordable clothing that is sustainably sourced and shall last you a long time. Now, this sounds nice, but it is unverifiable and fails the delete test. Now it's time for you to put the theory into practice. Which of the following statements are precise, unambiguous requirements? As in the previous module, you can pause the video here to give yourself time to read the statements and note down your answer. When you are ready with your answer, unpause the video to progress to the question screen. Let's quickly go through each one. Now, unless your contract package to the supplier includes a crystal ball and instructions on how to use one, you are better off avoiding design for all future scenarios types of requirements. They are meaningless. What does easily mean? With one hand? Within 4 seconds? With one operation? How long is a piece of string? This one came from a recent basis for design document, but what is it actually saying? Appropriate, vulnerable, minimize, any release? This is another example of something that sounds nice but is unverifiable and does not pass the delete test. Proper access. Now, I know it doesn't mean this, but what does it actually mean? And number 5, is it the launcher or the receiver? And how close is close? Which specific standard? Can I choose one? This last one is used a lot in package specifications. A catch-all, cover-your-behind statement that sounds nice, but it also doesn't pass the delete test. So the correct answer was none of the above. These were all ambiguous requirements that need fixing or deleting. Ambiguity costs time, money, and can have disastrous consequences. Where we have applied the rules and principles of unambiguous requirements, we have witnessed a 20 to 50-fold reduction in the number of clarifications coming back from the market. That's an immediate efficiency gain before even a single calculation has been completed or any piping even welded. Unambiguous and verifiable requirements must be our goal going forward. For now, for us and from him, it's thank you until the next module.